Clan Wars 2. Just hearing that is enough to send shivers down a Clash Royale player's spine. You'll hear a lot of talk in the Clash Royale community that Clan Wars 2 was the worst feature to ever come to the game. But is that over-exaggerated? What made this update so disliked that it made it worse than every other update to ever come to the game? This was released when the game was already well established, going on its 5th year. So in today's video, I will be talking about the events leading up to Clan Wars 2, why this update was so disliked then and even still to this day, and how this update changed Clash Royale forever. Let's start all the way back in 2019. What happened in 2019? Well, there was a lot of new content that was added to the game. A new arena, interesting game modes like Hog Race, Triple Draft, Mega Deck, Elixir Capture, and Mini Collection, along with Season Passes and the Party Mode. 6 new cards also came to the game. Overall, the game vastly improved in 2019 with a total of 5 updates coming to the game throughout the entire year. These updates also came with some core gameplay changes, quality of life ladder improvements, all complemented with monthly balance changes. The last update in 2019 came in November, which was a relatively small update, but nevertheless implemented some of the core changes to the game I mentioned a moment ago, which ultimately changed the strategy for the core gameplay of the game. But despite the amount of content that was added, players still wanted more. Players wanted something big. Moving into 2020, it started off as a normal year. The release of the Firecracker wasn't a great start, but annoying cards were nothing unique to 2020. Now, since it was 2020, the game would be going on its 5th year of its life. Clash Royale wasn't considered to be a new game at this point, and every year had brought some decent updates to the game. However, Clash Royale was unprecedented for Supercell at the time of it first coming out in terms of allowing players to play head-to-head against each other in real time, which had never been possible in any Supercell game up to that point. Clash Royale was essentially the testing grounds for real-time battles to be implemented in future games. Now, I can't go too much into specifics here because I am not a coding expert and my knowledge on this sort of thing is extremely minimal, but because of the way this game was designed, the foundation of the game wasn't stable enough to sustain massive updates, which was the main complaint players had in 2019, other than these guys. Having head-to-head battles in real time was not the kind of game Supercell had been used to in the past, so although it was working by 2016, it certainly wasn't perfect. In order to produce massive updates in the future, the team would have to spend a lot of time building a foundation for them. Despite all the effort the team would need to put in to fix this code, Supercell would manage to release 6 cards throughout 2020 and provide balance changes and new seasons every single month. However, because of the behind-the-scenes work that needed to be done as well as getting new cards into the game, it left a big problem for the game. How are they going to fit in the time for a new update? The last update was technically in November, but it was a rather small update not changing much, so the last real update by many players was considered to be in September of 2019. This made some players expect an update in early 2020. One reason some players assumed a big update had to be coming was because the accounts that started playing before the game's global launch had turned 4 years old, yet 4-year badges were not in the game yet and wouldn't be added until the next client update. With the global launch anniversary on the horizon, they would certainly need to update the game so long-term players could receive the badge like they had every single year prior. In the video promoting the anniversary season of Clash Royale in February of 2020, a teaser for Clan Wars 2 was revealed. This teaser provided almost nothing to what this feature actually was though, so it was up for debate. Clan Wars 2 was actually talked about as being a possibility because Clan Wars wasn't that enjoyable to many players and much of the community had been calling for massive changes for a while, but many speculated that this could be something bigger. This image does seem misleading looking back retrospectively because it teases the update as an open world adventure and not a river race. Regardless though, this image could only be put into this video for one purpose: hype. Of course, that's why you would ever tease anything. This got players very excited because it sounded like Supercell had some big plans coming to Clash Royale in 2020. Although a Q1 update would not be coming in 2020, it sounded like a big update was bound to come by summertime to make up for it. March of 2020 was a pretty big month, not just in Clash Royale, but the world. With massive lockdowns happening during the pandemic, there was some concern in the Clash Royale community that the update would be delayed. Nobody was really sure what was going to happen since obviously it was a confusing time, but on March 20th, 2020, right around the beginning of these lockdowns, Drew, the community manager, would put out a Reddit post on what they've been up to. Despite the pandemic, both Seth and Drew, who were the community managers at the time, both said that the pandemic didn't really slow down their productivity on the update. And Drew even said that the pandemic was helping him stay more focused, if anything. The post itself said, quote, "Things were moving very quickly. Supercell at no point stated that the pandemic was causing delays. The most they said was an update post in May of that same year confirming once again that the pandemic was not a major reason for any delay. At the point of the May update post, the update had been teased more than 3 months ago. Updates in Clash Royale have never been teased this long before coming out ever. This is because back in 2017, Supercell overhyped the Touchdown update, which is guessed to be part of the reason why this update was so hated back then. Supercell even mentions that in the May developer update. Because of this, expectations were huge for this update. If Supercell was confident enough to hype it up this early, it was bound to be something revolutionary. At this point in time, it had been 6 months since the last update, which was already the longest time between 2 Clash Royale updates in its history. Now, it was almost the end of the second quarter of the year, and there wasn't even a confirmation on what this big feature would actually be. At this point, players were getting pretty angsty. The update was expected to come any day now. With expectations high, players would be disappointed. 6 months without an update was ridiculous, and the update had been teased for 3 whole months with not even a follow-up. At this point, Drew was getting so much negative feedback and constantly bombarded with questions as to when the update would come. He always gave very vague answers and never really said much about it in general. I gotta say, at the time, it really showed just how cruel some people can be in the Clash Royale community. Mods were actively deleting hateful comments and leaving comments at the top of posts reminding people not to harass Drew. I wish I could show you the worst ones, but a lot of them were of course removed. Now, I do agree that people shouldn't be afraid to give criticism where criticism is due and put pressure on the developers when they're not fulfilling what they should be, but it was getting to a point where it was clearly going too far. Drew was a big target of hate during this time, and people were just not holding back. People tried to defend them, saying that the pandemic was holding them back, but Drew and Seth both confirmed multiple times that the pandemic was not the cause of any delays. Not to even mention that Brawl Stars and Clash of Clans were both getting major regular updates throughout 2020. The blame had to be on them. As June came along and with the second quarter ending with no further word on the update, tension only grew. And it wasn't helping that every new challenge released that year was just blank spawns in the back, unlike some of the more creative game modes released in 2019. It was so bad that people were actually getting hyped for balance changes. Yes, balance changes were actually getting so much hype because it felt like the only actual change that the game was getting. Clash Royale always got an update at the beginning of summer, but in 2020, Clash Royale did not get one. The reason Supercell games usually always have some sort of summer update right at the beginning of summer is because much of the team takes a long break from the game during the summertime. Because Clash Royale did not get an update in June, it seemed unlikely that the update would come the entire summer. Where was this update? The developers said things were going very quickly in March, despite the pandemic. What was the holdup? Finally, on July 3rd, the Clash Royale community would receive some actual information on what this update would be. It was officially confirmed that Clan Wars would be getting a total revamp. Clan Wars 2.0 was on the way. Clan Wars was always seen as kind of a chore and always had a lot of problems, so Clan Wars 2 was poised to fix all those problems. We'll talk later about how successful Supercell actually was at fixing these problems, but this update at the time looked really promising from the video, and the video was mostly positive comments praising that the update looked amazing and that they were happy to finally be getting an update. This trailer also confirmed that the update would be coming in August, which was almost an entire month away, but it was just nice to know that a firm date was set in stone to many players. Usually Supercell would never announce an update more than a month before it actually came out, but I think with how upset people were getting, they decided to put this out to try to ease the tension a bit. Remember, people were really expecting this update to come in late May or June, so if they continued to not say a word about it until August, the backlash would have likely only gotten worse. But as August came along, the update did not. It didn't come with the new season, nor the week after. Players waited and waited and waited. On August 8th, a new video was uploaded going more in depth about Clan Wars 2, implying the update would drop in mere days as there was still no official release date in this video. But weeks went by with no update. Finally, on August 23rd, it was confirmed the update would come on the last day of August. So the announcement in July technically wasn't a lie, but because it had been such a long wait, and just generally when you announce something to come, you don't expect it to come at the last possible minute. Players at this point were just pessimistic. Players were memeing on this update so much, and the more time passed, the more the memes just seemed to come true. And now, even though the update was only about a week away, the bad news did not stop there. On August 27th, it was announced that quests were going to be removed in this update. This was done on the basis of the rewards being included in Clan Wars 2, but it was pretty obvious later that this was a complete lie. Quests offered rewards that were never available in Clan Wars 2, like giving players a super magical or legendary king's chest, of which were either extremely difficult or impossible to obtain otherwise without spending gems. Also, since Gem Rush was not returning, Clan Wars 1 and quests were basically the only ways how you could get free gems in Clash Royale. And now both of these were getting removed as Clan Wars 2 offered no ways to get gems. Gems were really hard to get in Clash Royale, so taking away the two main free methods came off as greedy. This meant after the update, you could really only get gems from pushing high on ladder, crown chests, and global tournaments. Oh, and remember at the time, global tournaments were only one a month instead of two. Also remember back in 2017, free chests were actually removed as a justification because quests would be replacing them. With quests being removed, this meant the only way to get free chests were officially being removed from the game, making the free chest impossible to obtain. This might not sound like a big deal, but free chests were one of the only two chests in Clash Royale to give gems. Now, even though supposedly Clan Wars 2 was supposed to be the compensation for these lost rewards, they gave additional compensation for removing quests by giving everyone a free legendary king's chest. As if they may have suspected people may not have been fully satisfied with a feature that helped free-to-play players a lot being removed. August 31st rolled around and it was finally time for the big update. Over 9 months since the last update and 11 months since the last major update, making it by far the longest time players had waited for an update in Clash Royale history. This update had some of the biggest expectations players had for an update ever. Duels and boat battles were exciting new ways to play, but it was apparent on day one, shocker, there were a few problems. And this goes way farther than glitches, but fundamental issues with Clan Wars 2 as it stood. Where do I even start? Let's go over some of the fundamental problems with this update. This update was meant to fix a lot of problems from the original Clan Wars, but just made most of them worse and created new ones along the way. A huge problem is that you needed a big clan in order to have a chance in the river race. With a small clan, you often wouldn't even make it to the end of the river, and if you didn't make it to the end of the river, you didn't get any chest. You just got some weird boot that didn't give you anything. This was a problem because so many rewards were condensed into Clan Wars 2, which meant if you weren't succeeding in it, you were progressing a lot slower than before the update. Another problem with Clan Wars 1 was that you needed a lot of high-leveled cards in order to participate. But Clan Wars 2 didn't fix this problem, it made it worse. To earn more fame, as they called it back then, you needed higher card levels, not just because of poor matchmaking, but because higher card levels gave you more points if you won than if you were to win with lower card levels. This gave players with higher card levels an extra advantage that was completely unnecessary. Also, there were no level caps whatsoever, unlike the original Clan Wars. Even in the lowest league, you could use level 13 cards, which ultimately led to some very unfair matchmaking. In Clan Wars 1, you at least had a pool of options so you could generally pick cards you had at a higher level, but in Clan Wars 2, you really needed 32 maxed cards to have a chance. In Clan Wars 1, some days you had the option to play casual game modes, and some of them were set at tournament standard, meaning you could have some variety and not have to worry about levels. But with Clan Wars 2, it was now limited to just duels, regular 1v1 battles, and new boat battles. Boat battles were essentially useless because every active clan was making it to the finish line on the first day. Also, wars reset weekly now instead of every 2 days like before. So if you were in an active clan, you probably didn't even have a chance to play the boat battle. Also, war decks for players would reset at different times depending on what time zone you were in, meaning players who lived in earlier time zones had an inherent advantage because their war decks would reset first and they could cross the finish line before their opponents were even allowed to play. There was also no limit to how many players could participate in Clan Wars in one day. This allowed for a strategy of joining clans with alt accounts, doing war battles, leaving, rinse and repeat. Another major issue was that there was no way to opt out. If you didn't participate, you were severely hurting your clan. In Clan Wars 1, if your clan had fewer participants, the game would even it out by giving the players who did participate extra attacks so that every clan could have a fair chance regardless of differing numbers of participants. But Clan Wars 2 forced everyone to participate even if they didn't want to, and there was no advantage to any clans that had less players. There were also some other annoyances, as only one player could do their war battles at a time and not being able to edit your war decks after you use them for the day. Also, guess what riveting gameplay you would get to experience if your boat broke down and you had to fix it? Yeah, it used up your war deck and that was it. No battle. And if you wanted to practice an attack against a boat that was already defeated, the machine gun towers were just replaced with regular princess towers. Not a huge deal, but it really showed how messy the update was. This update was an absolute disaster. Clan Wars 2 had already felt like a chore, and there were so many exploits that completely ruined any potential fun. The outrage at Drew exploded. It was so bad that one day after the update launched, Drew made a lengthy post explaining some of the controversial changes. My favorite one is the reasoning behind quests being removed due to it being too much of a repetitive grind, not like that was literally what this entire update was. Now, depending on how you look at it, the rewards were actually better in Clan Wars 2, but it really only benefited higher leveled players, unlike quests. This update ended up really hurting casual and low level players. Drew was under more fire than he had ever been in Clash Royale history. Players waited 9 whole months for this update. This would be the only major update to come to Clash Royale in 2020. And this was it? Naturally, people were creating memes making fun of the update, and Drew actually responded to some of these laughing along, but it always resulted in more anger from the community. On top of the biggest feature of this update being a total failure, there was a second major problem that came to Clan Wars 2 that actually had nothing to do with Clan Wars 2. And that was that the button to queue open a chest and the button to unlock it with gems were swapped. What this led to is so many players accidentally gemming open chests when they just meant to queue it. This felt really scummy, mainly because there seemed to be no reason for this. This change was also not mentioned in any patch notes or anything, so it was a complete surprise to many players when they realized that they just wasted their gems that they could no longer earn back because of the removal of quests and Clan Wars 1. Drew did not exactly make more fans by pointing out that it was actually a necessary change and that players just needed to be more careful. He actually referenced a post in which someone was actually asking for this UI change, which led to many people going to this post to harass this person, which ultimately led to him deleting the post. The post didn't even really have a lot of support at any point, so none of this really helped Drew's case. This update only helped pay-to-win players, and the things Supercell were doing were just so shady. Players genuinely thought this game was dying, and Supercell was simply trying to squeeze every last penny out of this game before they shut it down for good. Now, I'm not sure if I would call this a mainstream belief, but it did get bad enough that Drew actually did have to come out and deny these rumors. For these next few days, Drew was on full-time damage control, but it was pretty much the same thing until September 5th. On September 5th, the outrage had just gotten so bad, which led to Drew putting out a super lengthy post comment trying to be very transparent. He actually took some fault in the update being a failure and basically admitted it in this post, which is what I think the community really wanted to hear. When the entire community is yelling at you that this update sucks and you're trying to spin it in a good light and joking it off, it feels like you're not listening, which is only going to make the community louder until they're acknowledged or they decide to leave. Drew admitting fault and admitting the update wasn't great finally made people feel like they were being heard and put some minds at ease. What made people feel more assured was that Supercell acknowledged what a disaster cycle 2020 had been and that 2021 was going to be better with more updates planned with things that the community actually wanted. However, one thing that was confirmed as well that worried some people is that Clan Wars 2 was still heavily being worked on. Now, this might sound good, but because this update was still being worked on, it made it seem like they weren't working on anything new, meaning new content would take even longer. Now, although some people had confidence in Supercell, many people at this point had lost all faith in Supercell, so really only time would tell if the team would actually get their act together. Although I do think Drew got more harassment than he deserved, I do think it was a great thing that the players were so passionate about pushing for a good update because I think it led to 2021 being a really great year for the game. So what happened after these first few days of the update? Supercell did start pleasing the player base somewhat by refunding the mistaken gems for accidental chest openings, and they gave everyone a free tower skin, which is something they said wasn't going to happen again after December of 2019. And just when things were starting to look a little uphill, Supercell released the Electro Giant, but that's a story for another day. In November of that year, Supercell updated Clan Wars 2, fixing most of the glaring problems. The update added global resets so that earlier time zones wouldn't have an unfair advantage anymore, as well as not allowing more than 50 people to participate in a single war. They would also provide a boost to clans in the final days of war, making it easier for less active clans to finish, then also adding more leagues to making matchmaking better. And finally, it added casual game modes as an option, meaning standard 1v1s weren't the only option anymore after you finished your duels. Now, yes, boat battles still existed, but they were so useless and unfun, I don't even know if I would consider them an option, especially since you couldn't even play them if you were done the race early. Every update up to June of 2021 would include more changes and improvements to Clan Wars 2. These updates reworked the whole training system, adding training days, making boat battles slightly more worth it, and officially removing the advantage higher levels had, no longer giving them more fame just for having higher levels. The update was so broken it needed 3 additional updates just to be what it should have been all along. Although Clan Wars 2 still isn't perfect and feels like a chore today, it certainly is a lot better than it was in 2020. Clash Royale would see 2 new community managers in 2021, meaning Drew was now gone. Now, I don't know if he chose to leave on his own merits because the stress of managing this community was too much on him, or if he was forced out of this position because he was no longer a great face for this community. Although it does seem like Supercell was just being lazy all throughout 2020, most of the work that was being done was behind the scenes work building the foundation and room for bigger updates in the future. It was rumored that duels and boat battles in themselves took a lot of time to develop. I mean, just Golden Names took an entire week of development alone. As I said before, I'm not a coder, so I can't judge. Just so you guys know, Drew was in fact a developer on the team. He wasn't just a face, so he was partially responsible for what was going into these updates. Personally, I do think he left on his own merits. He certainly wasn't the only person to blame for the update, but this is all just speculation. He actually did appear in one video in 2021 and did come back in 2022 when one of the new community managers was gone on paternity leave. I know this is all just online criticism and there was never any actual physical threats towards him, but trying to keep a community happy when you have almost nothing to offer them, I'm sure can be stressful. I know this whole spiel about Drew isn't too related to the topic of this video, but he was certainly a major figure in the Clash Royale community for a long time, especially in 2020, and him having a direct impact on the game and the community made this worth mentioning to me. People just needed a punching bag to take out their frustration, and even Supercell themselves in the past encouraged people to take their anger out on Drew if there were to be any. I've always wanted to talk to Drew to know more in depth of what was going on inside his head at the time, because observing how he handled the chaos was always very interesting to me. At least with the game in a much better state, he seems to be doing much better today. Although the community may have driven Drew to the point of insanity, it certainly led to a better future for Clash Royale. Even if bigger updates were already planned originally with the foundation of the game improving, 2020 certainly sent a message to Supercell that better updates needed to happen. It definitely ensured that we got some amazing updates in 2021 and 2022 and never having to wait more than a few months between each update. Clash Royale is doing incredible today compared to 2020, and it's really nice to see that this game is actually being praised nowadays rather than constant disappointment and rage, because I truly do love this game and I want it to succeed. Hopefully 2020 remains to be the worst year for Clash Royale, because I've actually felt excited to play this game with these recent updates, which I haven't felt in a long time before this. Although it does suck that we've had to sacrifice the rate of new cards being added to get these new updates, I think many players can agree that it was worth it. If you didn't play Clash Royale in 2020, consider yourself lucky, because today is certainly better than getting excited for balance changes only to see that they killed the Magic Archer. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two about this era of Clash Royale. I always have fun making these videos and immersing myself back into these different eras. I've been playing Clash Royale since the beginning, so even though this was a negative time, it certainly was a trip down memory lane. Let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in future videos, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.
Keep the change, you filthy log bait players.